Hello and welcome to New South Wales State Archives 2022 regional webinar series about schools and teachers. This image is from NRS 15051 and it's of Cooma Public School, and we'll be looking at some more of these images as we go through the webinar. In the spirit of reconciliation, New South Wales State Archives acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I acknowledge the Darug people whose land I'm speaking from. Hello Cooma, it's fabulous to be with you, at least virtually, and thank you so much for joining us from wherever you are. Archives on Tour is just one of the ways that New South Wales State Archives engages across the state. The two other ways that we do that is through our regional network and our touring exhibitions. This is the third year of Archives on Tour. We actually visited towns in the first year, and it would be great if we could do that in the coming years. So this is what we'll be doing, bringing you virtually archives about the schools and teachers of Cooma. We'll talk about the series of archives and how you can find them on our website and how to access them. There'll be time for questions. Out of the literally millions of archives, we've picked just a few to show, but there are more on the Archives on Tour pages, and you can find that from our homepage through Discover. So this is a little snip which was actually drawn by the headmaster in 1933, who was Arthur Jacobs, from 5/15504A, and there was a school farm. This is showing the school farm as being on that block between Bombala, Albert and Dale Street, close to the district hospital. I wanted to start by talking about two really great sources for this topic. The first of which, the Department of Education website includes this absolutely fantastic source. You can search for a place name to see if there was ever a school there. And if there was a school, you can find out what sort of school it was. It also explains all of the different types of schools and provides other background information about education. The sort of place you can just browse and have a great time. The other source is our website, New South Wales State Archives website, which is www.records.nsw.gov.au. We've got lots of state archives about schools and records. Many of the state archives you'll be seeing today were actually created in the schools by the teachers. All of the things that you're going to see on the web page and in my PowerPoint are state archives. These are the series we're focusing on, the school files, 1880 to 1976. So it's a huge slab of New South Wales's European history and covers the whole state. The photographic collection, who doesn't like a good photo? The teacher career cards covering 1908 to 1987, and the site register cards covering 1930 to 2000. There are many other series that you could use to research schools and teachers, so well worth having a look at some of the guides you'll find on our website. Schools are just everywhere is one of the things that I think that's so intriguing. So in 2020, there was just over 2,000 government schools operating across New South Wales. Since 1948, there's been well over 7,000 New South Wales government schools and over 30 different types of schools. What's fascinating about schools is that they often have a central role in towns, whether the towns are big or small. The schools reflect and are impacted on global events like wars and statewide events like drought and depression. Schools are involved in and create local events. They reflect their locations. You can tell from a school file whether it's in a coastal town, a railway town, mining town, or a pastoral town, or whether it's small or large. The school files were created by bringing together all of the correspondence about each school. The correspondence is from teachers, parents, the education department, district officers, other government departments, local members of parliament, education ministers, local councils, parents and citizens groups and other local organisations. The later files, so they're from about 1940, don't contain detailed information about teachers, and they're also much more official in tone because, as you'll discover, school files are really not official in tone. These are the schools that we're looking at. So as you can see, 3 are still open and Cooma East Public School closed in the 1970s. The similarities between all of the school files, as I've already suggested, they reflect their times, both the World Wars, particularly World War I, the fact that women resign when they marry, depressions, the expanding and decreasing populations, but they also reflect their town. They'll show the sort of area they're in. So these school files leave you in no doubt that Cooma is in a farming area and it's the central town of the area and that it's on the railway. So all of those things that do impact on Cooma show in the files. As Cooma grows in population and area, so does the need for schools and the size and types of schools. Now the school files, some of them are up to 15 boxes of paper and some are only a couple of centimetres thick. And one of these school files was even thinner than that. I've selected a very small quantity of the papers from the Cooma schools. They've been digitised and on the archives, the Cooma Archives on Tour webpage. And now we're just going to look at a smaller selection of those things. We're starting with Cooma Public School, which commenced in 1863 under an earlier school system. This is from the earliest part of the school file. Now, Thomas Druitt was an Anglican clergyman who worked in the Monero area for over 20 years from 1866. He had a view on many things. Here, his view was about military drill and the fact that it should be used in the schools. So he's writing to what was then the Council of Education. Gentlemen, I'm informed that for a considerable period it has been your position to give children attending the public school in Sydney and its neighbourhood the advantage of a training in military drill under a drill sergeant. If this is so, I have no doubt you'll be happy to extend equal and similar advantages to children in the bush, wherever circumstances permits. I'm not sure that his letter had quite the impact that he would have hoped, because the attendance numbers you can see here on the right are actually written on the back of the page, and I think that that maybe sums up what they were more focused on. They do tell us, though, in March 1877 that the public school was averaging 46.3 students, whereas the Cooma Roman Catholic School was averaging 29.4. And the numbers across that year went up and down, but around 40, closer to 50. These are notes about another letter from Reverend Druitt, this time about there being sufficient space for religious instruction at the Cooma School. So that was what Reverend Druitt had written about. And the response from probably the local inspector, this letter, meaning the letter from Reverend Druitt, neither represents the view of the local board nor indicates any desire on the part of the townspeople. He's basically saying we need a bigger school. There is an excellent classroom in connection with the school where the Reverend Mr. Druitt could give religious instruction without any serious interruption to the regular school business. It is desirable that if possible a paddock should be obtained, and the local board and myself have already taken action in that matter. To remove the school to another site and to sell the present buildings would be quite unnecessary and inadvisable. The grounds are rather limited. Otherwise, no fault can be found with the present premises. So this is in 1878. As we all see as we go through this, the limited grounds and the location are reoccurring themes over the years. I don't know if it's still continuing. It would be interesting to know. In 1880, which was the first year, the local teacher, Albert Gale, started up an evening school. So evening public schools had basically been established to provide an education for persons over 14 years of age who previously received little or no education. So a really great idea. They offered young men, because basically women were allowed to enrol, but very few ever did, 2 hours instruction 3 nights a week, usually conducted in the local public school building by the headmaster or other teachers. Most of the schools were poorly attended. I think that 2 hours a night 3 times a week is maybe why, and they were short-lived. What it does leave us, as it does here, is so to get one you did a petition, And that meant you get the name of the person who'd attend, their age, their occupation, and the signature of the parent. So it's a little summary of the people that are interested in, or whose parents are interested in, getting further education and the jobs that they were doing. So we've got John Aitkins, who's 20, who is tinsmith, as is Thomas Oberture, also a tinsmith. So you can look down to blacksmiths, to carpenters, a builder, another carpenter, a saddler, builder, carpenter, carpenter, painter. Gentleman is crossed out for Charles Thornton, who's 15, and a printer, and the ages at which these people are working. The discussion about space and how it works started. And as you can see, there was a residence which was adjoined to the school, which was made up of the classroom, which is quite large, and a smaller classroom. The district inspector solved the argument regarding why the space available didn't work. If only the number of pupils and the space in the bigger schoolroom and the smaller classroom were considered, it was sufficient space. But because the numbers of pupils in each class weren't even, it meant that the classes couldn't be arranged properly. So the argument between the teacher and the townspeople saying it doesn't work, we don't have enough space, and the Department of Education, who were just looking at the measurements and the numbers, was finally solved, and it meant that Cooma would get more room in the school. So in 1885, approval was given for additional space for Cooma public schools. So they're saying that advised that schoolroom accommodation be provided for an ordinary attendance of 160 pupils in one department, and estimating that it would be about evenly split, 80 and 80. Looking at the number of children enrolled, which was 83 boys and 74 girls, with a total of 157, and the expected enrolment to go up. This was something that was always there. There was reason to believe that the population of the school district will be permanent and likely to increase, because there were schools that it seemed from the very beginning that they wouldn't increase. So here's a little plan of the school. So you can see on the left, there's the school room with the classroom attached to it and attached to the residence. And that sits in the girls' playground with the girls' toilets and the girls' shelter shed. And then in the other part of the playground, they build a similar, well, actually a larger size schoolroom, and add some additional water closets. There was an outbreak of scarlatina. So the research that I did says it's either the same as scarlet fever or a precursor to it in Cooma in January 1890. The school board thought that the school shouldn't open after the holidays. So in January, they're writing to the Minister of Education or the Ministry of Public Construction, beg to call your attention to the prevalence of scarlatina in the town and the desirability of keeping the public school closed until the middle of February. The school should open next Monday so that there is not sufficient time for me to call the school board together. So he's just written on his behalf, which makes perfect sense. The department, however, stuck to the regulation to exclude children of families with infections. So basically he's saying that I do not concur the regulation as to excluding children from infected families is sufficient to meet the case. And that's what occurred. Cooma's cold climate is raised from time to time throughout all of the school files. So Mr. Larkin, the teacher at this point in 1890, would like to move to Sydney or the North Coast after nearly 7 years at Cooma. He says, I'm compelled to make the application owing to the ill health of my wife and children during the winter months. This year I have been attacked myself with a severe and dangerous cold, and I feel that my only chance of preserving my health and strength and cogent usefulness in the service is to move to a district. As you can see, so that's the letter from the teacher and then his signature, and below it is the comments from the local inspector saying that the teacher's health has not been good of late and his wife and family are not strong. Recommend that he be removed to a school of the 4th class in Sydney district as soon as something suitable comes up, which is basically what they did, was that people would be moved from more distant rural areas to closer in rural areas over time, so that they both got experience in the different sort of places, but also because most of these teachers actually had a home in Sydney, that they were closer to their home. In 1891, Cooma Public School became a superior public school, which meant that it could provide both primary and post-primary education. But the size of the site continued to be debated. So on the left, you can see a fairly uncomplimentary description of the site. The playground is too small, an area 1 acre, and is not level enough for school purposes. No yard is provided for the teacher's use, nor can any of the existing playground be spared for such purposes. The closets are placed on the high ground at the back, while the lowest portion of the ground is occupied by the buildings and the tank. Though objectionable, this is, in the circumstances, the only arrangement possible. And then this is one of two maps I'll show you. So this is around that sort of 1890s period. The blue arrow shows the site of the school, and the green arrows show two other possible sites. So if you're a Cooma person, this will probably mean even more to you, and you'll probably better think about what is there. And then another copy of the map with even more suggestions of sites. So they were willing to resume part of the old agricultural company's land, the reserves, everything was being considered. It was suggested by just about everyone. And then the small hand-drawn map on the right was another suggestion. So you can see the existing public school marked and the proposed site, which was larger. I don't know if it was flatter, and would have surrounded the School of Arts. Over the time we'll be talking about, there was a range of ways in which to become a teacher. Up until 1905, most teachers in government schools were trained on the job as pupil teachers, who usually began their 4-year course between the ages of 13 and 16. During school hours, a pupil teachers taught a class full-time, think of that as 13, and each day outside of school hours, they were instructed in teaching method and content by the head teacher. The reports on pupil teachers are often found in the school files. Some of the areas to be reported on are quite surprising, I still think. So this is for Frances Birch, who is a pupil teacher at Cooma. So the first question is about health. It should be stated whether the pupil teacher suffers from any physical infirmity likely to interfere with the discharge of duty. So Miss Frances M. Birch is apparently of a strong and healthy constitution and has no physical infirmity. Since her appointment, no suppressions, no serious failure have been marked, and no leave of absence of any kind has been obtained by her. And then the conduct out of school. Miss Birch's moral character is of the highest degree satisfactory. Her associates are also people of good moral character. Her punctuality is excellent, diligence, obedience and attention to duty very satisfactory. In all lessons given by me, her diligence in home studies very satisfactory. So that's Henry Thomas, who's the head, and J. Downey, who I think was the infant's mistress. Miss Birch prepares her homework very creditably. So it looked like she would go on, you would hope, to a successful career. I've copied the whole of this letter. I won't read you all of it. I think some of the handwriting is probably quite good enough to read. So in essence, Mr. Spicer has written from Hardwick Cottage in 1893 because he doesn't see the need for his son to learn Latin or French. Have the honour to address you on a subject that of late has given me some trouble and also a considerable amount of uneasiness. The case briefly stated is as follows. My son, Tom Sydney Spicer, now a scholar in the 5th class at the Cooma Superior Public School, has no aptitude or inclination for acquiring languages. In fact, all of the pressure that could be brought to bear on him would never make him a linguist. The necessity for his being taught Latin and French does not occur, as he is not intended for any of the so-called learned professions. An education suitable for business or more pursuits is all that is required, and that can be obtained here under the able teaching of Mr. Thomas, headmaster of our public school. I may truthfully add that the French, as taught at the provincial schools, would stultify a Parisian, for from the very pronunciation he would fail to recognise his native tongue. As it turns out, I have experience. Some years ago when I was in Paris, I found my attempt at French an utter failure and I was far more successful in English. He's actually the CP inspector, so the conditional purchase inspector, so works for the Lands Department. The answer was that French is not a compulsory subject for boys and Latin only to a small extent for the 5th class. Recommend that father be informed that his son need not take French and that if he still desires, the teacher will be asked to exempt the boy from learning Latin. However, this is not good handwriting. This is another reoccurring theme, the fuel allowance, which basically means how much wood is going to be provided to burn in the fires to keep the children warm. So we have a very difficult to read, or part of a very difficult to read letter from the local member, who's probably been encouraged very strongly by the PNC, is usually the way that it works. So it's May and the fires are not being lit in the schools. He adds in a pencil note, this is one of the coldest places in the colony and should certainly have fires in the schools. The teacher has telegrammed back, this is Mr. Denning, amazed that I'm reported for not having fires. Weather since allowance granted has been delightful. Days bright and sunny. Teachers and children unanimous, fires not necessary. Fuel ready when required. Shall I carry out your instruction under these circumstances? So all of the small bits and pieces that both, as I said, reflect where this school is really clearly, but also just the day-to-day business of the school and how it's run and the people that have some impact and influence on it. Moving into May 1907, the local school board was making it quite clear to the local member of parliament what was required. Land was. So I've been requested by the board also to communicate with the Honourable Minister of Public Instruction through you in regard to the 2 matters already mentioned to you. Is the acquisition of additional land to the school area at Cooma Superior Public School and the erection of a well-equipped classroom at the same school. The board is very strongly unanimously of opinion that Cooma School has been much neglected during the last few years and that teachers and scholars have been greatly handicapped on account of the disabilities under which they have worked. This opinion they wish to be respectfully conveyed to the Minister. Land was definitely purchased and a school building was planned. So the lovely little image at the top is, as you can see, proposed new school at Cooma. You can see down here, so the side of the school is on that corner of Commissioner and Vale Street, and the land between the school and the lane that runs there had been acquired. So nearly doubling the size of the plot. This plan from 1908, so not long after that, was in a bundle of papers that went up to 1912 when the work was actually carried out, and gives us an idea of what was there and what was going to happen. So the residence is now separate from any of the teaching areas, which I think is probably a good thing for all parties. There is the school building, which had been there since the beginning of the school, and a new school building beside it. There was a tennis court, which is never mentioned, just shows up on plans. Sheds will be moved around, new weather sheds will be put in, and then the area which is being purchased, which does have 2 buildings on it, so needed to be dealt with, will be the new playground, which will certainly make a lot more space. And again, just that additional information, so you know what they were made of, where they were sited on those blocks, and then that along the right-hand side there was a cordial factory at that time. Lots of little small bits of information. The teachers were moved frequently around the state and they could claim travelling expenses, and their claims are quite amazing. They give a detailed picture of how people travelled at the particular time they're moving, and when, as in this case, they provide a list of their furniture, an idea of how they lived. So Mr. Wilson was moved from Murrumburra to Cooma in 1910. You will also see, so the black is what he's written and the blue is the changes and crossing outs that the department is willing to pay. But basically, he is charging for packing at Murrumburra, the railway carriage for him and his family, cartage from Cooma station, preparing the floor before he moved in, unpacking and laying furniture. I've never seen anyone charge for that. First class fares for 2 adults and 2 children, 2 sleeping berths from Harden to Cooma and conveyance to Harden station from Cooma, and contingencies, and usually that means possibly not unreasonably food on the way. So his total that he claimed came to over £27, and he's going to receive about £21. So his furniture for his drawing room, he has a piano, linoleum and carpet, a suite and 3 tables, pictures. The dining room has a large seated table, heavy leather suite, sideboard, pictures, linoleum, and then through the kitchen. So perhaps not detail you'd expect to find in a skill file, but just fascinating about the way people moved. And so again, Miss Florence Travers was moved to Cooma in 1911, and it took her 8 weeks to find board and lodging. She's saying that during that time she stayed in a hotel, and there's the hotel bill here for the Cooma Hotel. The hotel cost £12 for the 2 months, which was a big part of her salary, which was basically £20 for the 2 months. And she had to receive monetary assistance from my home. The department in this instance actually granted her an allowance of £4. So Arbor Day has been observed in Australia since 1889, and it's a day which basically encourages the planting of trees. Cooma now, having that new playground, because in some earlier times they decided not to participate in Arbor Day, but had enough space to be able to plant trees. Mr. Wilson, who was the headmaster at the time, and you can see it's reported, this is just a snip from a very long article, which is in the school file, but also in the local paper, I'm sure, had the really novel idea, I think, of naming the trees. So as people were invited to plant the trees, they also could name them. So Light of the Age and Progress were planted by the mayor and the ex-mayor, and they refer to the recent installation of electric night in the town. I think it's Houston is named after the first public school teacher of Cooma, Blacksland after the son of the explorer who assisted materially in the disposition of the trees. You've probably already realised that the life of a school and a teacher includes many different things. So Empire Day, the letter on the left, involved a procession, a picnic for all of the children from Cooma and surrounding schools. And the letter is basically from the Joint Honourable Secretaries of the Empire Day Committee to say that, you know, the schools will get the half day. So that's Cooma Superior School, Bunyan Public, Cooma Creek and Evansdale half time, and Dairyman's Plains provisional schools. And that will be taken on a Wednesday because that's the Trade People's Weekly half day. So that meant that the whole town could much more easily participate in it. And then what might seem like a fairly minor thing, the height of the closets is a very important matter. So someone has to go out, probably one of the teachers, and measure the height of the closets and then come back with the suggestion of the teacher's instructor to have a block of wood provided to reduce the height in each case to 12 inches. These are extracts from a letter the Cooma P&C sent to the local member in 1915. All of the towns around Cooma produced petitions. So Anaminby, Bredbo, Jindabyne, Moonbar, Berrydale, Dalgety and Bunyan. And basically it's really aimed by this stage at getting secondary education. This is just part of the letter. So the Committee of the Parents and Citizens Association, that meeting held last night, had before them the letter received from by you from the Minister for Education refusing the request for an establishment of a district or high school at Cooma. Mr. Griffith stated the bursary system has been designed to enable children of special ability in small country towns to attend the high schools in larger towns. And basically they're just wanting to point out what this really means. So the bursary is competitive and can only apply to a small percentage of the children who are now desirous of continuing their education. The allowance of £30 per annum to a child living away from home is insufficient to pay expenses. Taking my own case, my child cannot get the bursary as I cannot comply with the income provisions. My lad, who was only 12 years of age, in December last gained a scholarship to the local school, which entitled him to 4 years education at the Goulburn High School. It was my intention to send him there, but on inquiry I found that it would cost me 18 shillings a week for his board with extras to be paid for. He says, I asked from your intimate knowledge of the people, how many would be in a position to pay out such sum for a period of 4 years? There are other cases similar to this at the present time. Then again, how many parents are prepared to allow their children to go among strangers and practically be at the mercy of the world? Means that a child is thrown on his own resources from about 12 years of age. Is this desirable? We think not. At that point, I'd have to say those entreaties fell on deaf ears. So November 1918 was as busy in Cooma as it was anywhere in the Western world, and in some ways busier. The Premier visited, as there was a Monero by-election, and as was traditional, he granted the school children a day off to be taken whenever suited. So Mr. Humphreys, who at this point was the headmaster, explains that they hadn't done that as yet, and then the armistice came, bringing with it more than a normal interruption. And at the same time, there was an outbreak of measles. So after Mr. Humphreys had reported that there were measles, this is a list of questions that they came back with from the Chief Inspector. So basically the details of the name, age, sex, class and address of all children who have had measles since the Michaelmas vacation, onset, date of return to school, number of children in attendance in each class, school towels or drinking vessels for common use provided at school, are slates used? Are Circulars 4 and 6 amended reissue being strictly enforced, and have you any idea of the prevalence of the disease at the Roman Catholic and private schools? This is just his answer to question 1, which is a list of children. So I can tell you, and you can see for yourself, that Harry Angel, age 6 years and 3 months, who's male, in first class from Sharp Street, Cooma, caught measles on the 8th of November 1818. So it's an amazing little potted list of detail, and this does occur through the school files. I've been struck again and again at the similarities between the worlds that we've been living through in the last 2 years and the sorts of things that were taking place as measles, diphtheria, typhoid, scarlet fever had an impact across the state. So this is George Humphreys, who was the headmaster that we've just seen. It's career card. So this system of cards began around 1908 and continued through until 1987. You can just about see in the top left-hand corner 2 things. These are heavily used cards, but there is a number 641, and above that would have been another number. So what it really tells us is that George Humphreys started teaching before these cards started, because that gives you the roll number and the page number from the earlier records called the teachers' rolls. They're indexed on our website, and you can see digital versions of them through Ancestry if you have access to Ancestry. It gives you, to the further left of that, he was an assistant teacher when he started. He was born, then looking at the right, in 1875, and that he's married. So in 1908, he was at West Maitland, and then you can see the schools that he's moved to, coming to Cooma in March 1913. And he was there for about a bit over 5 years before moving to Scone in December of 1918. The class refers not to his class as a teacher, that's dealt with over here in his other classification, it's the class of the school. So Cooma at that stage was a class 4 school, and he was moving up in the world when he went to Scone, which was a class 3. And down the bottom, that he retired in 1939. The action taken under Regulation 41 just means that he'd reached retirement age but wanted to continue teaching, and so they'd do that annually. Mr. Ludgeby was appointed principal at Cooma following Mr. Humphreys, because they were continuing to provide some secondary education. They wanted someone with better secondary qualifications, and it was basically so they could be better prepared for the intermediate certificate. He arrived and basically said the residence is not habitable, and it took nearly 10 months to have the work done. So we're saying that about a fortnight ago, an official inspected the building and decided to recommend the sending of a new stove as the present one is beyond repair. On receipt of the stove, I was to call for tenders to have it placed in position. However, there is no word about the stove yet, nor anything else has been done to make the living rooms habitable. In the meantime, my family and I are obliged to board at a far from comfortable hotel at some distance from the school. With young children, this is a most unsatisfactory way of living. Would it not be possible for sufficient men to be spared to repair immediately the main rooms of the house so that we could go and live in it? This may be completely coincidental, but there was a little flurry of marriages and resignations in 1919. I kind of picture men coming back from the war and either returning to their fiancés, or there were men back from the war and you met new men. All of the women were excused any remaining part of their bonds and having to repay any of their travelling expenses if they produced their marriage certificate. So basically, marrying was an acceptable reason for breaking your bond, but only in this time period. And then in 1919, there were also peace celebrations in October on account of the Cooma Peace Hospital celebrations. So, and I love the practical thing is that it was delayed for rain. So we just, that isn't when it was going to happen, but it rained, so we'll just have it a little bit later. Cooma was made a district school in 1920, so that was the next step up. And as part of that, provision was being made for a science room. So we've got on the left the layout of the entire school, if you like. So they had first through to 7th class, the number of enrolments, as always, in boys and girls, and then the teachers. Fairly unusually, the addresses of the teachers, who have all said just care of the public school. So 3 female teachers and 3 male teachers, and as was really quite common then, the female teachers teaching the lower grades and the males teaching the upper grades. So basically an enrolment of 175, and the attendance on the day they took this was 158.5, which is pretty good. And then this is the sort of standard layout for what a science room would look like, a small freestanding building, and a little plan of where it would sit near the main school. The P&C wrote to the department requesting an additional fuel allowance, and they had it delivered by their local member who was, as they say, so well acquainted with Monero winters. He in turn urged a liberal increase in the allowance, and it was increased from £9 to £14. So that's not an unreasonable allowance. Because basically the other thing that they're saying is that the number of fireplaces have increased from 4 to 6 because they've added the additional building, and that, they're writing rather than the current headmaster, because he had not yet had a winter at Cooma, is therefore likely to underestimate the requirements. Members speaking on the subject stated that it would take at least 4 tonnes of wood per fireplace, and as the quotation for firewood is 22 and 6 per tonne, it will be seen that if the amount of the allowance is not at least double, the children will be without a fire during half of the winter. In 1925, the local inspector wrote to the chief inspector, and the local inspector was that first port of call between all of the schools and the rest of the department in many cases. A good local inspector, it's become really obvious to me, was a really important thing. Talking about the suitability of the rural syllabus at Cooma for Cooma, the fit would have been good, but as you can see in the margin, it's under review. So basically what he's saying is, as this district is entirely a rural one, it seems very desirable that the new rural syllabus should be adopted throughout, both in primary and super primary classes. The fullest provision has been made in the syllabus for the teaching of the foundation subjects of English and mathematics, so the changeover would not be a revolutionary one. The general education of the children would be well provided for. In addition, the special needs of the people would also be met. Talks about the need for teachers with those qualifications. Certain schools in the districts are very conveniently situated to act as trial schools for rural work. These schools are Milton, Maria, Bateman's Bay, Narooma, Tilba, Cabargo, Bega, Pambula, Eden, Candello, Bombala, Cooma and Anaminaby. So that didn't go ahead. There's a lot of discussion about the rural syllabus, and I think that they had some trouble embedding it down. But looking at the numbers on the right, there seemed no immediate likelihood of Cooma moving beyond a district school, because they would do a look at the enrolment of secondary pupils, and it's not going up greatly, and it was done in the September quarter, so from 30 to 40, 48, 42, 41. They don't, the demand for higher education over a period of 5 years has not been pronounced, and it's entirely inadequate to warrant the establishment of a high school. No students have ever taken courses beyond the intermediate standard, so district school would be fine. I found this fascinating. Cooma Jail closed in 1909, and by the 1920s it was being considered as an option, well, for many things. In the top left-hand corner, they're suggesting that the material from the odd jail might be utilised in the erection of the necessary buildings, because they're always needing more buildings. It does not appear that the jail is to be used further as such. The buildings are being allowed to fall into decay. People of Cooma have previously made requests for the main jail to be converted into a high school. Such a course, I believe, is practicable and will be desirable when the demand for additional high school accommodation is much greater than at present. So it even had got as far, even there was a lot of no, not a lot of interest, but obviously the Department of Education had contacted the Minister, or the Minister of Education contacted the Minister for Justice to talk about it. There'd even been a suggestion that it could be used as a hostel for children that didn't live in Cooma but lived outside that, which seems slightly surprising. And then as you move through the school files, you just come across these plans, either architectural plans on, as you can see on the left, or the hand-drawn ones by probably the head or someone else on the school, how much the school had really grown over time. So in 1927, in the hand-drawn one, which is a bit clearer, you can see that the original building is still there, facing Commissioner Street. There's a science room, there are secondary rooms with the principal's office and a teacher's room. The residence is still there. Woodshed is tucked behind the shelter sheds. There's an infants and kindergarten room. They still have tennis courts, and there's more toilets. This is the sort of thing which is probably happening across the country. So this is in the 1920s, early 30s, women being left to support their children. They were both fortunate, these women, that as teachers they could return, and the Department of Education was obviously quite open to that. So on the left, Mrs. Elsie Cameron's husband had died from his war injuries in 1928. So she trained at Sydney Teachers College in 1923 to 1924 and resigned in May 1926. At the time of my resignation, I held a B+ efficiency mark. Since my appointment to the temporary staff in August 1929, I've received favourable reports from my headmaster and inspector. So basically, she's saying that as my husband has died and that's leaving her to support their daughter, could she be made a member of the permanent staff? She hadn't realised that she was indeed already part of the permanent staff, which was great. Whereas Kate Kauflein, and there's mentions of her at Cooma as Kate Elgar before she'd married, trained, served until March 1915, then resigned on account of her approaching marriage. At that stage, she was classified as a 2B for good service. Came back as a married woman in 1924 when she was accepted for employment, but because she was married, she could only be in a temporary capacity. But having recently secured a divorce from her husband, the decree nisi absolute is attached. She now applies for transfer to the permanent staff, which they did do so. So this is Kate Kauflein Elgar, first taught in Cooma in 1909. So you can see that on her personal history card, it's the second line down. It's a snip from one of her many leave of absence forms on the left says, the Monero climate didn't really suit her, and through all of the time that she taught at Cooma, she did have quite a bit of sick leave. And you can see on her card that in the very top right-hand corner, S under the S box, because when she started as Kate Elder, she was single. Then they've added yes in the M for marriage box, and then above that they've written in pencil DIV. And if you look at that, so she resigned from 1915 and shows her coming back at Cooma in 1924 before moving to Arncliffe after 5 years. And she finished her teaching career in Birch Grove. The sorts of things that make up the world of both the school and the teachers and the children, but also the broader community. So on the left, Governor visited, Governor Game, and he granted a half day. As you can see in the type thing, set instructions in November 1925 provide that when His Excellency the Governor or the Minister for Education visit a school, a special half-day holiday might be granted if the Governor or Minister so desire. And I think they pretty much always desired. So the head at the time, Arthur Jacobs, had quite cleverly suggested that they'd take the half day on the 11th of March, as that is the first day of the local show, and as many children are encouraged by their parents each year to absent themselves, the school was closed on that date. And then on the other side, that the Parents and Citizens Association have requested permission to install electric light into the infants room building, and they will bear the whole cost. They have this year a record membership in the history of this school, and meetings have been largely attended. The present meeting room is fitted with a small stove, and they desire to meet in a room which has a larger open fireplace so that the attendance will not fall off during the winter months. So it was serving everyone, both the infants, they get electric light, and also the P&C, which serves the school. Here, the endless request for an appointment of an additional teacher. At this stage, there was 42 children in first class, 36 in the second class with Mrs. Kathleen. Mrs. Cameron was taking the third and the fourth, so effectively 50 children. Mr. Lynch, 19 children in the fifth, and Mr. Medlicott and Miss Dudley were teaching between them the sixth and the first 3 years of high school. However, the numbers didn't stack up, so they didn't get an extra teacher. And again, there were repairs to the residence needed, because basically the rainwater drips through the ceiling in the main bedroom. The residents may at any time bring down a large section of plaster. And in a corner of the dining room, the rain seems to collect under the floor and soak up the walls. That had actually been going on for some time. So I think when they did get this work done, it fixed that problem. World War I continues to impact aspects of people's lives, and it seems to just for years. This is in 1935. So teachers that had served received war service leave, and looking at this, and it's often sometimes a case of doing some research or reading between the lines, that the war service leave must have been extended, this late in the piece, to those who were training when they enlisted, because Arthur Jacobs would like to be supplied with the names and addresses of all teachers who will receive leave under the concession of war service leave to students in training, because he wants them to all then write to the people who fought that case for them. On the left is a letter from Stanley Small. He worked for his entire teaching career, which was 40 years, as a relieving teacher and later as a relieving principal. You can see his career card on the Coonabarabran School records page, because he also relieved there. So he was at Cooma for a really short period in 1935 and is updating the inspector in this, which is basically there's 3 sick teachers, Miss Jack, Mrs. Kathleen and Warrington, and said, I'm worrying the department asking for a teacher, and 2 pipes burst last week. The frost was so too severe. I forward the local plumber's account. So you would have to think by this stage of his career, as it seems willing and able to cope with many things. The P&C had raised a number of matters with the Minister when he visited Cooma and are now following up before the annual meeting, which is basically all of the usual sorts of things. There's some land they think would be a great school site, and if it's not, dealt with now, then it may have to be resumed, in which case it might cost more. Domestic science course has been promised for some time now, and nothing's happened. Would like the matter of the school forest finalised with the forestry department so that planting may begin in June. Provision of a tool and dressing shed at the school farm is very urgent, and that our school playground might be terraced to make it safe for the children. Could the Minister have this done out of the Unemployed Relief Fund? As you can see, the land and the school forest have been extracted and will be dealt with separately. And number 2 will be dealt with separately, really leaving the smaller things to be dealt with. But there's a lot there to be going on with. A cookery room, or more properly a domestic science unit, was finally being provided in 1936, so that one had gone through. And in the second paragraph, you can see that there was a Miss Staff Inspector Kidd who did the recommendation about the provision of a fuel stove with chimney, copper and 2 tubs, sink and cupboards, sliding blackboard, and the enclosing of the veranda. So basically, in the 30s, as they do now, there were portable classrooms, so one of those would be used and then fitted up to allow. And I think domestic science is more broadly because the things like washing and ironing and all of the sorts of things that a woman would need to know how to do were going to be taught. Mr. Drummond at that point was the Minister for Education. This was, I think, handed to him by a deputation. And I think it sets out really clearly how unfairly treated the town felt it was. Schools graded as a 5th class school. To become a 4th class school, it is necessary that the attendance should average over 200 per week during the middle term of the year. And this has been emphasised again and again. The middle term of the year is the winter and the attendances are always low. The Cooma Inspectorate is the Cinderella of the Education Department. It's the only inspectorate in which there is no full high school. It's the only inspectorate in which there is but 1 4th class school. It's the only inspectorate in which there is no school higher than 4th class. Pupils who wish to follow a high school course under specialist high school teachers must go to the intermediate high school at Bega or leave the inspectorate altogether. It's a rural area. The majority of the people have rural interests, and whatever avocation the children in the district follow, they will have always a bias towards things rural. Unfair to grade the schools in the middle of the year when it's so severe. The last term would be more just. There's a theme that if there were facilities for a full high school, then to obtain the 4th and 5th year pupils would be easier. The work can be done at the local convent school, but this means a double tax on the taxpayer as he's had to pay extra for what the state is expected to provide. Cooma as the town has not stagnated. It's growing steadily and provision should be now made for the future. This on a more upbeat note, in 1939, they produced an amazing physical education demonstration. Mr. B. McBurvey had lessons passed on to him from the headmaster, Mr. Linz, who attended the camp in Brookvale in January. And so what they were seeking to do was to travel around the district and teach the children in all of the schools in the area so that they could come together to produce one physical demonstration featuring the children from Annaminabee, Jindabyne, Berrydale, Bredbow, Nimitabel and possibly Bombala. And it was a tearing success. The local member was there and telegrammed the Minister of Education to say what a wonderful job they've done and could they please have a holiday because they had really worked so hard. This is a plan from when the school was sewered in 1939, which must have been a red letter day, but it also again gives us that next picture of the school and how it had grown. And on the left, the dotted lines over one of the tennis courts is the proposed new classroom block. And then on the right, this was one of the really popular possibilities for a new site for the school, which was, as I said, it's an absolutely reoccurring theme. You can see that a creek runs between the number 28 and 2 acres. That did worry some people about having a school which potentially had a creek in the playground, but it was still a very popular one. As increased accommodation for Cooma Public School was being debated, this is in the 40s, there was already also the possibility of the many more students if the Snowy scheme was going to get started. So the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectric Authority is commencing the immediate construction of 300 homes at Cooma. For this reason alone, the question of the early commencement of the new school building at Cooma should be finalised. At this point, I don't think they had even decided whether they would build the school on the same site or a new site, and there is almost always a whole range of sites. It appears that it wasn't a new site that was found, they just kept extending. So now we're going to Cooma North Public School. The school file, because this is in that post-1940 period, is literally 2 pages. And it's basically about who will enrol where and when, which is the interesting thing. So opening Cooma North in 1953, and you've got to figure out who's going to go where, because children obviously who lived in North Cooma would already have enrolled in Cooma Central. So all of the pupils kindergarten to and including 5th class resident in Cooma North Township and at present attending Cooma Central School are going to enrol in Cooma North. All additional kindergartens or other pupils resident in the same area would just enrol in Cooma North, which is now their school. The 6th class pupils that are continue for the present at Cooma Central. The East pupils, so already the thought of that 3rd school, are to attend Cooma Central. Monero High School was the next of the schools to be developed. The name was agreed in 1954 and it seems to have been fairly unanimous, and it was pretty good because the head was already submitting badge designs based on Monero. I recommend strongly that the name Monero High School is adopted. Already there are schools at Cooma and Cooma North, and a school at Cooma East is approved. Confusion already exists in the distribution of mail. An earlier objection that Monero is a district and is not valid in this case as the high school, is not valid in this as the high school should serve the whole of the district. The Department of Education did have a standard way of naming schools. There would be the name of the town, and then they'd, as they moved around, they'd give them the name Cooma North, Cooma East. There were a couple of other examples of suggesting that this didn't help in separating schools out and making them sufficiently different for parents to understand. But in most cases, that's the style of name that is considered. By 1957, so it's only 3 years, more land was needed. And the head's quite frank about some of the issues of the block of land. The acquisition of this land is necessary also because of the very great dust nuisance which exists at present in the school grounds, with nearly 400 pupils playing in the areas indicated on the plan. Most of the grass has been worn away and the soil ground to dust, which is lifted by the slightest wind. And Cooma is rarely without wind, making the teaching of physical education lessons and the holding of outside assemblies extremely unpleasant for pupils and staff. Clouds of dust are also blown into the buildings and nullify the efforts of the cleaners. So this plan with additions shows you what they're going to do. So if you could picture the plan on the right as sitting below the plan on the left, they're going to put the portion of the land that's closest to Mittergang Road under lawn in 1958. They're going to add some shrubbery which might help with the wind. There's 0.8 of an acre at present time as playing space to be sown with grass seed in early April 1957. They're probably going to build on the boys' basketball court, other areas that are going to need to be changed, and this kind of strange shaped extension has been requested from the Snowy Mountains. So Cooma East Public School really, when it was set up, was in what was the Snowy Mountain Authority's land. The Snowy Mountains Authority was really hitting the ground running. And so the tenor of most of this file is the department saying, could you please have this site surveyed? And they're saying, yes, yes, we will, but not just yet. And the concern of the Department of Education that 1 acre plus is too small for what they would usually have, and that would usually only serve for a separate infant school rather than what was wanted, which was a full primary school. So the balance between a small site and the projected enrolments was worrying. And these, again, you can see the information they're looking at is based on Cooma Central and Cooma North, which had only just started. So from 1949 through to 1953, Cooma Central went from 239, 294, 350, 466, 488. And the smaller drop, presumably in 1953, is because 190 pupils had enrolled in Cooma North, so making the total across both of the schools 678. There's also concern about the fact that no allowance had been made for private building in the estimates for Cooma North, and these estimates should be regarded therefore as really conservative because they're thinking that people would not just come and live in the authorities, the Snowy Mountains Authority area, they may well build themselves, and that generally the whole of the town would grow. Cooma East was established on the 3rd of November 1953 when the Minister approved the establishment of a public school at Cooma on the site of the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectric Authority's project. And the site has been available by the authority, and it will be on, and then just the details of that, official details about what's going to be set up. The actual handing over the land and investing it in the Department of Education took about 10 years, but the school did start in the early 50s. So, how do you find these school files? There's an online index. Go to online indexes from the quick links page, click on S for schools, click on schools. If you're searching that way, you'll see what I'm talking about as school files will be listed as administrative files. You can also just search through collection search on our webpage as well. I'm going to talk about the site register cards. So there have been thousands of school sites over this period. A site might take some time to acquire, like the Cooma East, and not be needed to be used immediately. Some schools are acquired and are never needed, and therefore at a later date they're moved off. So there are quite an amazing amount of sites have been managed. I've included Cooma Creek, which was a provisional school and a half-time school between 1901 and 1913. It was about, my estimate is about 20 kilometres from Cooma. So it shows you the site, which is only really, for a person looking at a map. You can find it kind of by looking at the Brothers Creek. It shows when it was acquired in 1902 and when it was disposed of finally, which was in 1958. But it also serves as a reminder of the many small schools, quite a few that have been mentioned because Cooma did seem to look outwards towards its district. They were ringed by them. This is Cooma East. So this is the plot of land that's outlined in red. So between Wangi and Wagon and Walgara roads. And the site register where it's purchased from the Snowy Mountains Authority, and I think it was for £50 or something like that, because really it's just making sure there's a school. Notes that the school is in operation and that it was disposed of to Cooma Sheltered Workshops Limited in 1976. You can find the site register cards through our website. They've all been listed, but they're not digitised, but it will tell you whether or not there is one. They generally are for sites which are no longer managed by the Department of Education. Which brings us to the photographic collection. So it's quite unusual in that it was collected by the History Unit of the Department of School Education from around 1963 to 1991 to use when they were preparing school histories or doing research for public relations or giving presentations. So many of the photographs are not official photographs. They vary in subject, titling and image quality. There isn't photographs for all schools, and they cover all sorts of dates. They were just collected around that time period. So hopefully you can see that this is Cooma Public School, which is I think it's a great shot in that it shows what we've been talking about. The 3 or 4 different styles of buildings that you can see just in this one shot. So Cooma is the public school, is the only one that we do hold photographs for, and most of them are a group of 7 undated photographs. Looking at them, my guess is probably the 1960s or 1970s. This is another one of those photographs. I'm thinking that it is Cooma Public School, or it could be Monero High School. Either way, it's a great candid shot of just, you know, either just before school has started or perhaps at recess or lunchtime. All of the photographs have been digitised. There are some later ones, like those Cooma ones, that are not up on our website as yet, but to find them, just type in the name of the school or type in the series number, NRS 15051, and the town name into collection search, and you can have a look at them. And so lastly, we're just going to look at the teachers that held it all together. Just gives you an idea of the size of the New South Wales government school sector. Teachers usually spent around 3 years in a school before being moved. Some stayed much longer, some died in the service, some stayed for much shorter periods. Generally, women left once they got married in earlier years by choice or convention. And then in the 1930s, there was legislation that women must resign when they married. So that was in place from 1932 to 1947. Male teachers, particularly married male teachers, were often favoured and requested by local people, but then finding adequate accommodation was sometimes very difficult, particularly if they had families. The teachers' career cards covering this time period provide, as we've seen, quite a bit of information about each individual teacher. So this is the card for Reginald Richard Lynch, employed as an assistant teacher, first in 1912 at Cooma, before being moved on to Dandenong Half-Time School in 1913. And then you can see he's moved around, mostly through smaller schools, before resigning in 1919. He changed his mind, obviously, and was re-employed in 1920, some Sydney schools, some country schools, and then came back right down the bottom, you can see, as an assistant to Cooma in 1923. And then looking at, and this is the back of the card, it looks like he was at Cooma then until he moved to Shallow Crossing in 1933, so quite a long time that he was there. And ultimately retired in 1954. On the back of one of the other cards, they generally did record the details of marriage. So married to Miss J. Short by the Reverend Barlow, Roman Catholic, Sydney, and the date, which was the 4th of the 4th, 1922. By contrast, Alma Anne, or Annie Feld, had quite a short career. She was an assistant on probation when she was employed after her training at Hereford House. And she started work at Cooma on the 18th of January 1818, having born in 1897. You can see there was an S for single, which has been crossed out, and an M. So she married Mr. James Thomas Bottom in 1920 and resigned not terribly long after that. And there are lots of women's cards that basically reflect that sort of short period of employment. The teachers' cards are not listed by name on our website, so you can pre-order to view in the reading room using the series number, NRS 15320, and the teacher's name. Or you can order a copy through the Professions and Occupations Copy Service for $25. It's quite common with common names to find written on the card 3 teachers of this name. So if it is, you think, a common name and you're doing that, give us an idea of the time period the person was employed would be really handy. So 2 last things to do. One is, which is to say, look at this fantastic map from 1883 showing, what else would it show? Possible school sites. But look at their 4th site. Even in 1883, they had picked out a possible high school site. It's not where the high school ended up at all, because Cooma, of course, moved more north. The primary school probably didn't, but again, shows you where the post office was, where the hotel is, where there are stores and another hotel, where there's a bank, shops, dwellings. Yes, there's the vested site. And to say, do take the time to look at the archives on tour Cooma School page.